Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war and general geopolitics video, news video for the 3rd of April 2025. We're going to start with Russia spending nearly $220 million to rig Moldova's election, according to the Moldovans, and the EU referendum in 2024. Earlier, the UK imposed sanctions on the pro-Russian NGO Eurasia, which is allegedly responsible for attempts to rig the referendum in Moldova. So it's really good that's coming out. I saw some new stats on like TikTok accounts that were fake Russian accounts in sort of Romania and Moldova, and it's just absolutely shocking. Just the sheer volume of influence from these social media platforms has been incredible. Right, Hungary has decided to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. The announcement came shortly after Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, arrived in Hungary on an official visit despite an arrest warrant from the ICC. So actually, Hungary should have essentially detained Netanyahu. Well, it's no surprise that Hungary are going to dip out of being members of the ICC. Hungary is indeed now Europe's safest haven for fugitives and criminals after sheltering ex-North Macedonian Prime Minister Gruevski and Poland's ex-Justice Minister Romanowski. It's now Netanyahu. Hungary even quit the International Criminal Court to avoid enforcing his arrest warrant, says Pani. Goodness me. Right, in Poland, the presidential race in Poland is soon to take place, or is taking place. The anti-Ukrainian candidate, though, is losing support. So that is good news there for Ukraine. A poll conducted by Polster and commissioned by the Polish newspaper Super Express has indicated the anti-Ukrainian politician Sławomir Mencen, who is also a Polish presidential candidate from the far-right Confederation Party, has dropped to 3rd place in the presidential race. In 2nd place is the head of the Institute of National Remembrance, Karol Nawrocki, who is supported by the opposition Law and Justice Party. He received 23% of the vote. In contrast, Mencen, who recently caused outrage with his controversial statements on abortion, lost the support of some voters. With 19% of the vote, he came in 3rd in the latest opinion poll. But interesting that Confederation was in 2nd place before that. So the Law and Justice Party is a fairly populist right-wing party that was previously in power before Donald Tusk's coalition. But they are anti-Russia, and for them to be leapfrogged by the Confederation policy that was even more, that was the wingnut extreme, is really, really challenging. 4th position, the poll is occupied by the Speaker of the Polish Sejm, Holonia, who 8% of polls voted for. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Right, moving on. Sweden is modernising 64,000 bunkers, according to the Daily Mail. 9 million euros has been allocated for their restoration. The bunkers will accommodate up to 7 million people and will protect against explosions, radiation and chemical weapons. Wow, that shows how serious Sweden are about the threats going forward. Now, Kazakhstan has discovered a rare earth metal deposit. That's Kazakhstan there, near Kyrgyzstan and amongst the stans. The estimated resources of the deposit in Karaganda region is over 20 million metric tons at a depth of up to 300 meters, about 700 grams of rare earth metals per ton. As of now, Kazakhstan is not included in the US Geological Survey's list of countries that have rare earth metals deposits. If the discovery is confirmed, only China and Brazil would exceed Kazakhstan by rare earth metal reserves. I don't even know whether that's a blessing or a curse. Wow, yeah, it could be that they then just become a location to be exploited by bigger players outside. You look at Ukraine with a minerals deal. Now, Trump, as we know, announced reciprocal tariffs that they were going to be put on for all countries. Ukraine faces a 10% base tariff, while Russia, Canada and Mexico are excluded. US sanctions block trade with Russia, yet 2024 trade did total $3.5 billion. and 526.1 million in exports and 3 billion in imports, which is to say there should be tariffs on Russia, as I mentioned in the previous video, or in the tariffs video this morning. You can't say that they're not on the list because they are already sanctioned, because Iran and other countries that are sanctioned are on the list. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it just looks like they are giving preferential treatment to Russia there. Now, The Economist is showing here that Trump's he takes America's trade policies back to the 19th century. This is the direction of travel for trade, particularly since that was Smoot-Hawley, which ended in the Depression, and you started getting free trade being the order of the day. And now we are seeing, I mean, just look at that. Look at that. And in fact, I've seen another graph to suggest it's actually up here once it's all understood exactly how much the trade, the tariffs will be. Actually, it's far higher than the Smoot-Hawley trade tariff levels. Just incredible. Now, I think it's worth listening. We're not going to spend too much time on the tariffs because I've already done enough on that. But as Jakub Janowski says, these people are literally like stupid. Let's listen to the Treasury Secretary speak to Caitlin Collins from CNN.
And should we view these as permanent?
That, you know, I think we're going to wait and see how this plays out.
And if countries retaliate, which some have said that they would, some have said they wanted to wait and see, what is the White House's response going to be to those countries?
Well, Caitlin, one of the messages that I'd like to get out tonight is everybody sit back, take a deep breath, don't immediately retaliate. Let's see where this goes, because if you retaliate, that's how we get escalation.
And then
I just want to point out how insane that statement is. He says, just sit back, relax. And if you retaliate, that's escalation. That's like going around to Doris next door, punching Doris full in the face, which is an escalation from no one punching each other in the face or from minimal, maybe verbal insults, punching her in the face and then saying, if you do anything back to me, that's escalation. Hang on, says Doris, you just punched me full in the face. What? That is the escalation there. Like, what are you talking about? So Scott Bessent, like, you have just done the escalation. Don't say everyone should just sit back and do nothing, because otherwise, if you retaliate, that will be escalation. It's absolute insanity.
Because if you retaliate, that's how we get escalation.
And then it becomes a full-fledged trade war, in your view?
Not a trade war, depends on the country, but you know, remember that the history of trade is we are the deficit country. The deficit country has an advantage. They are the surplus countries. The surplus countries traditionally always lose any kind of a trade escalation. So,
and by the way, you've then slapped tariffs on countries that you have a trade surplus with. So just, it's all so insane. Now, there are some theories that now abound about this trade tariff scenario being the result of AI, ChatGPT. Did the White House use ChatGPT vibe code, a retarded formula for our tariffs, and then we're too dumb to cover it up? Yes, the wildest trade story you missed today. So this whole thread goes through what's happened, and just to let you know, leaning heavily on James Surowiecki, whose thinking underwrote my criticism in my first video today. So it goes through, right, first of all, it was claimed to be a reciprocal tariff scenario. Then it is clearly not. The numbers are actually derived from working out the trade, the imports versus exports, and dividing one by the other. It's nothing to do with tariffs. And then that was confirmed later. And then the White House brought out first of all, they brought out a formula and said, actually, no, this is tariffs. And then people parsed down that formula and said, no, that literally is exactly what we said it was. And it was exactly the formula that James Surowiecki said it was. but with Greek letters to make it look like they did something mathy and complicated. But wait, there's more. So this is the addition to what I said earlier. So the internet got wind of this and checked AI using ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, and Gemini to see what they would say when asking how to formulate tariff policy. And you guessed it, all the LLMs, these are the large language sort of big AI platforms, basically gave the exact formula that the White House published. And so here's a really interesting look at that. We can go and look at what the ChatGPT and others actually said. Let's just go. Yeah, so you can look at this. Essentially, it's basically the reply from the White House to James Surowiecki. And just some incredible stuff that makes what the American government did look like they've just gone, oh my goodness, what should we do about trade? Let's just whack it into AI and see what they say. So yes, it looks like the United States is vibe governing trade policy all at this point. Now, you could argue, well, actually, if AI knows everything on the internet, then why not go to a place like that? I mean, there's an interesting debate to be had around this. Like, what is wrong with going to ChatGPT to work out your trade policy? I don't know, answers on a postcard. Now, some interesting stuff coming out from the different countries and islands and territories belonging to certain countries and how they've been slapped with tariffs, or in some cases not so much. So this is a sort of meme or whatnot going out with regard to France. So France has been, as part of the EU, has been slapped with 20% tariffs. So the Americans didn't know that Martinique and Guadeloupe are part of France, and they've only slapped 10% tariff on them. So I wonder whether you're going to start seeing a massive amount of exports coming through Martinique and Guadeloupe. Maybe the French is going to just send all of their trade through that island or something. Anyway, or that island territory. The tiny island of Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, this goes the other way, got a 99% tariff because somebody bought $3.4 million worth of goods in July 2024, most likely crustaceans. The 5,800 inhabitants only bought $100,000 worth of US goods in 2024, but they've been slapped with this 99% tariff because it's nothing to do with tariffs. If someone's looked at the Americans have just bought a shed load of crustaceans from this island area because, do you know what? It's a good place to get crustaceans. And then saying, that's terrible that we bought all these crustaceans off you. I can't believe we bought these off you and you've not bought anything near that significant amount of money off us. So we're going to hit you with, let's do the calculations, 3.4 million divided by, that's basically 100%. So we're going to put 99% tariffs on you. It's just insane. Absolutely insane. Now, the 10% lower tariff is good news for the UK at first sight. So the UK, there's a lot of people saying a lot of different things. I was listening to LBC and some people calling in to LBC who are so anti-Labour government were saying, this is terrible. They've done this. That this is Starmer's fault that David Lammy has insulted Donald Trump before. It's like, what do you mean? The UK's got literally the lowest tariffs. Like, why are you blaming the Labour government? Like, it couldn't be better for the UK now. Like, all the countries in the world, the minimum is 10%. Yeah, unless you're Russia. That 10% lower tariff is good news for the UK at first sight. However, one of Trump's goals here is to sow division between Britain and the rest of Europe. And that might create bigger and more costly problems for Starmer ahead of the Reset Summit in Brussels in May. Wow, so there might be some and I was wondering exactly this, that some very interesting dynamics with regard to the UK now being slightly better off than our next door neighbours in Europe, and there being maybe a bit of resentment there. What dynamics could that lead to? But also, like, just the idea that 10% is just still a problem for the UK. And certain industries are going to be really hit badly. And then we have all that leverage the US has been trying to lord over us in terms of reducing tech taxes on the UK, stuff like that. Now, I was watching a video about Australia having 10%, and Anthony Albanese there doing actually a really good job to keep that at 10%, because the US went in with trying to do similar things with reducing their what's called the PBS. So the PBS in Australia is rather like NICE in the UK, which is our quasi sort of governmental organisation that bargains the price of pharmaceuticals on behalf of the NHS. And with any trade deal going on with the US going forward, a free trade deal, it's often been claimed that NICE is going to be what is on a chopping board in a trade deal. We'll do trade with you if you get rid of NICE, because what happens with NICE is it bargains down the price. We don't pay like $800 for an inhaler or insulin or whatever crazy stuff goes on in the US. We have NICE that bargains on behalf of the NHS, and they drive down the price of drugs for us. The US does not have any centralized bargaining ability, and therefore the big pharmaceuticals dictate the price of pharmaceuticals. Now, in the UK, NICE drives these prices down to such a significant level that the pharmaceutical companies hate us for that. But it gets even more serious than that, because 25% of the world's drug purchases are defined by NICE pricing. So there are states around the world that say, hang on, in the UK, NICE has driven the price down to that, and we're aligning our prices with the NICE pricing. So if we buy that, it needs to be at this price. And so the bargaining power of NICE isn't just for the UK, it's actually for 25% of the world's drug purchases. Now, there's a similar thing in Australia called PBS, and PBS basically does exactly that. And that was what the pharmaceuticals, they wrote a letter to the US government saying, we want you to use that as leverage in trade deals with Australia, because and the US did that. So the government, I was watching this video that's basically saying the government is just beholden to corporate diktats, like the big tech going to the US government, we want you to do this on behalf of us. And then the big pharma going to the government saying, we want you to do this on behalf of us. And it's just like they are just this corporate entity, the American government, or this entity that just does stuff to the benefit of their corporates. Now, of course, you can say that's in the American interest and making more profit and blah, blah, blah. But the idea that the US government is working for the little guys, that it isn't just completely beholden to like the biggest, the most money, the elites. It's the completely false premise of that populism that MAGA supposedly represents. Let's get rid of the elites. Who are we going to replace them with? Oh, billionaires and massive corporates and big pharma. Okay, brilliant. So they get to dictate policy. Yep, that's exactly who's dictating policy. Foreign policy as well. Big pharma's going to dictate our foreign trade policy. Oh, brilliant. So we got rid of these elites who are like government civil servants and replaced them with billionaires and people that are just in this to grift and make money. Okay, fantastic. That's the kind of populism I want. So then we have 10% on Ukraine, and difficult but not critical is what Minister of the Economy has explained concerning Trump's new tariffs on Ukraine. So they're trying to say, actually, we're all right, 10% compared to the rest of the world. Obviously, we can just about manage that, but it's going to hurt. Of course, it's going to hurt. A general tariff of 10% applies to Ukrainian exports in 2022. Ukraine exported goods worth $874 million to the US, while importing $3.4 billion. In other words, Ukraine has a massive trade the US has a massive trade surplus with Ukraine. And this is, when people come to me and say, look, this is just fair, it's about rebalancing the trade, it's like, well, hang on, if you were saying that was unfair, and some Americans said cheating, that the US has a trade deficit with certain countries, that means it's unfair and cheating on these other countries when you have a trade surplus. So when the US has a trade surplus here, that's unfair on Ukraine. And instead of recognizing the double standards there and saying that is unfair on Ukraine, we need to balance the books, they apply a 10% tariff still on them. It's like, well, if it's any consolation, though we've got trade surplus with you, and thanks for that, we are going to hit you with 10%. At least it's not 25%. So there is that, but we're still going to punish you. We're going to punish you for doing the right thing. We're complaining that not enough nations around the world have trade surpluses, or we don't have trade surpluses with all these nations, and that's really unfair. You're all bloody cheaters. We're going to complain about that, and then reward the people, the nations that do have that with tariffs anyway, because we're bastards. we got Ursula von der Leyen giving her response to this. Obviously, there are many things that she has said and different people have said concerning, from within the EU. But this is just a minute of her.
I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us. So we will stand together and stand up for each other. Our unity is our strength. Europe has the largest single market in the world, 450 million consumers. That is our safe harbor in tumultuous times. And Europe will stand at the side of those directly impacted. We have already announced new measures to support the steel and cars sectors. Now, we will also convene strategic dialogues with the steel, the automotive and the pharmaceutical sectors, and others will follow. Europe stands together for our business, for our citizens, and for all Europeans. I know that many of you feel...
That is, pretty strong stuff. I think that's the right kind of thing to say. That Europe is going to stick together. We're going to be united. We do have the ability to deal with this. Interesting, the German economy minister has countered Trump's measly 7 pages of tariff attacks by showing hundreds of pages. It's not the German, that is the EU, I believe. The EU countermeasures that could come into place if negotiations fail. So, that's quite an asymmetry there. Then already... Ursula von der Leyen appears to be, I presume this is now, already in Central Asia. I mean, she said that speech this morning, I think that was 5 a.m. CET, so Central European time. So I presume she just got on a flight and then winged it out to there, Samarkand. So we are in Samarkand for the first ever EU Central Asia Summit. Tomorrow we will launch a new strategic partnership with Central Asia. It means we can rely on each other. And in today's world, that matters more than ever. So straight away, the US has pushed Europe closer to Asia, where they'll be doing greater deals with Asia. Trump's tariffs could also violate NATO's Article 2. And I mentioned this with regard to Canada recently, and indeed Denmark, that the economic coercion of the US with regard to Canada and Denmark is in violation of Article 2. Norway's foreign minister said that actually Trump's tariffs in general appear to be doing this. It says members should promote, quote, conditions of stability and well-being, seek to eliminate conflict in their international economic policies, and will encourage economic collaboration between any or all of them. Well, do these tariffs do that? No, they don't. Now, I'm just trying to work out whether... Yeah, so there is this claim that Trump has actually declared a state of emergency with, in line with these tariffs. And I think that is the case. Yeah, Trump, he's done that. Let's look at this particular one. Sorry, I got the wrong link there. Now, if this is the case, Trump declares a state of emergency in the US to protect the economy. This is authoritarianism 101. You declare a state of emergency and then it gives you greater powers to do X, Y, and Z. That should be, honestly, a massive warning bell, a real alarm bell for people in the US that Trump is about to do undemocratic things. Foreign Minister of China, Wang has visited Moscow. He met with Putin and signed a bilateral agreement with Lavrov. Russia's foreign ministry commented, quote, the talks were held in a friendly and open atmosphere, characteristic of Russian-Chinese relations. So they have done some kind of bilateral agreement. That's not going to be good for Ukraine. It's not going to be good for the rest of the world. Now, moving off tariffs, we have the news that Pete Hegseth, nor any American representative, will be at the next Ramstein meeting for the first time ever. So last Ramstein meeting, the UK's John Healey chaired it with Pete Hegseth being there. This time the Americans are not going to be there. And Shashank Joshi from The Economist says, what message is this supposed to send other than one of succor to Russia? Fine if you want European allies to take more of the burden. They get it and are willing to respond. But this just reinforces a quite reasonable view that the Trump administration doesn't care what happens in Ukraine. I think you are starting to see... I wonder whether it's kind of giving up on Ukraine. This is harder than we thought, and it may be just walking away from not just support for Ukraine, but negotiations, and whether the potential for a war in Iran or a big bombing of Iran that I've talked about is on the cards. Iran have closed their airbases. We've got 7 stealth bombers in Diego Garcia. Whether Trump is going to try and distract away from domestic woes with bombing Iran, and then Ukraine, Russia just take a real back seat. I don't know. We have today a NATO foreign ministers meeting where Marco Rubio is there, and he's calling on NATO allies to increase defense spending to at least 5%. So that's back on the agenda, it seems. Now, US as active as it ever has been in NATO, says Rubio. So Mark Rutte opened with expressing condolences about the death of US soldiers during NATO training in Lithuania. He then highlights the new US administration's desire to break the deadlock on Ukraine with Russia, and pointedly says that European allies step up their spending in response to demands from Trump. Rubio thanks Rutte for his condolences and stresses that troops' participation in training shows that, quote, the US is in NATO as active as it ever has been. And he criticizes hysteria and hyperbole about the US and NATO, and the US wanted to pull out of NATO. Trump's made it clear that he supports NATO. We're going to remain in NATO. He's made it clear, said Rubio. He adds that the US wants NATO to be stronger and more viable and to invest more in national security. Trump is not against NATO. He is against a NATO that does not have the capabilities that it needs to fulfill the obligations that the treaty imposes upon each and every member state. No one expects that you're going to be able to do this in 1 year or 2, but the pathway has to be real. And then there were no questions after the statement. So that was it. I mean, pretty incredible there. So yeah, lots of stuff coming out about the tariffs. Tariffs will cost Poland 0.4% of its GDP, 2.4 billion euros, according to their prime minister. Spain's actually put a bunch of money aside. I think it's 14.1 billion to deal themselves with the impact of tariffs, and have called on the EU to do that. The EU do have packages in place, I think, ready to help out particular sectors who are most affected. And yeah, I think that's enough on tariffs for now. Then we're going to go to Mike Waltz. And I talked about this yesterday, about how there are rumours that there were other signal groups that Mike Waltz and security team members and other politicians were on concerning different topics. The signal one that included Jeff Goldberg was about the Houthis, but there'll be ones for all sorts of other areas. Now, apparently that is definitely the case now. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz's team regularly set up chats on Signal to coordinate official work on issues including Ukraine, China, Gaza, Middle East policy, Africa and Europe, according to 4 people who have been personally added to Signal chats. And they have direct knowledge of 20 such chats. So this is now becoming widely reported. This is in Politico. Then we have the news that Mike Waltz has been doing a lot of work on his personal Gmail account, which is exactly the issue with Hillary Clinton. So, there are lots of people still saying these guys need to be sacked. They need to resign. It's not going to happen, but it's absolutely egregious double standards being on show there. Now, I talked to you about Elon Musk supporting the Brad Schimmel for the Wisconsin Supreme Court judge in that election for that position. He put 20 million towards that and was giving these $1 million checks away. And it turns out that he's said a few things that have been 100% illegal. And not just him, but the person who refused one of these checks, which is seemingly for signing a petition that funnels you into voting for Brad Schimmel, right? But of course, you can't bribe people to vote. You can't give money for people to vote. He said he had done that on Twitter and then deleted his tweet. Then he uploaded a video of one of the people that received these. By the way, 2 people that I know have received these checks. One was the chairman of the Republican whatever, and this is a Russian I mean, a Russian woman is effectively taking $1 million. It's just absolutely incredible. Anyway, direct evidence of criminal election bribery under Wisconsin Statute 1211 quote, she says on the video, "My name's Ekaterina Diesler," she said in a video posted Monday morning. "I did exactly what Elon Musk told everyone to do. Sign the petition, refer friends and family, vote, and now I have $1 million." So that's literally what she said on this video. Elon Musk then posted that up and has now deleted that video because it's an admission of illegality. So not only did he say it, but the person he gave the check to said it, and he then publicized that and then deleted both of these. So he essentially, this is a court case waiting to happen. Like, he 100% should be going down for that, for bribing people to vote. It's their understanding that's what it's for, and it was his understanding. Whether he can get, technically say, I was actually paying them for this, or the perception was it was for voting, and you said that as well. So, now that I could make a video on this alone, and lots of people were asking me, why have you not done a breaking news on this? So, Trump is essentially sacking Elon Musk, pretty much. Now, they're selling it as well, he was only ever temporarily in charge of Doge, and once that 130 days or whatever it was is over, he's going to go back to running his own companies. And you've had Caroline Levitt come out and say this more formally as a statement. He said he's a very busy man. He's it's costing him in time and money to do the job he's done. Thank you very much. Once it's over, he's going to go back to do what he wants. But what the chatter is behind the scenes is actually Trump has got really annoyed with him because he is becoming more poisonous than Trump. So you can argue that Trump's PR capital is sinking at the moment. When you look at the Florida shifts in the Florida district elections, you've got a shift of 22 points, a shift of 16 points. That's not so much about Trump. That was to do, not so much about Musk. That was to do with Trump. Musk actually minus 11 or minus 10 in Wisconsin. Now, I said yesterday that's because he pumped a load of money, and had he not put that money in there, it probably would be a lot more than that. But that is being seen as Musk losing that election for Brad Schimmel. And now Republicans are admitting quite a little bit more openly that Musk is toxic. His brand is toxic, and literally, his brand, as in Tesla, is really suffering on account of Musk and what he's doing and saying. And now there's this idea that he needs to go. So Trump has told aides that Elon Musk, says Andrew Neil, will be stepping back in the coming weeks from his current role in the government. It was always only a matter of time. And there are lots of different reports on that. Yeah, here's another one. Donald Trump is telling members of his inner circle that he's kicking Elon Musk out. This comes after MAGA insiders are seeing how toxic Elon's brand is in swing states across the country. This is a huge development. Lots of people, of course, predicted this, but yeah, fascinating that appears to be happening. Gavin Newsom's warning that woke up this morning, he's a governor of California, to the Trump administration freezing all of California's Title X funding. Title X provides basic reproductive care like birth control, cancer screenings, STD testing. It's a Republican founded program. Richard Nixon, of all people, established it in 1970. This is just plain cruel. Now, Trump is freezing family planning funds for Planned Parenthood, which, of course, when it's connected to also abortion provision for reproductive care there, that's really, what the Republicans and the MAGA Republicans kind of hate. But, of course, they do an awful lot more with regard to reproductive care. And this is why it's often talked in terms not of abortion, but reproductive rights. And some people say, oh, you're just trying to make it sound nicer, and this is about abortion, but it's not. It's always about more. It might be for the MAGA Republicans, but for those defending abortion, it's a larger suite of things that go when you reduce the funding. So cancer screenings, STD testing, birth control, all the things that pretty much everyone would agree need to continue to be funded. Anyway, back to Elon Musk, by the way. Moments ago, Hakeem Jeffries issued this stern warning to Republicans, quote, Elon Musk is completely and totally on the run. This guy is one of the most unpopular figures in the country because Donald Trump has unleashed him. Republicans are going to try and distance themselves now from Elon Musk. It's not going to work. It's too late. You're attached at the hip. You're going to feel the consequences of it, just like you did in Wisconsin last night. So Elon Musk, he is becoming this real, really divisive figure. I played you this yesterday in a live stream. Honestly, this blew my mind. This is a state of American politics. This is a committee hearing in Congress.
I'm going to leave you.
And this guy is a Republican lawmaker. He's a representative. So he is a politician, right? And look to whom he refers.
And I'll yield back a little bit of my time. A direct quote from Joseph Goebbels. It is the absolute right of the state to supervise the formation of public opinion, and I think that may be what we're discussing here, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Two things are astonishing here. One, that he's quoting Joseph Goebbels in Congress. It's just absolutely stunning, and you'll hear the response. And two, he just gets up and leaves, as if I don't have to listen to what's said afterwards. See you later, bye.
With that, the representative from Texas, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to respond to what my colleague from Texas just said. When you're quoting Joseph Goebbels about the role of state in the public debate, we have a big problem. Isn't that right, Ms. Jacobitz? I mean, that's alarming as hell to me when that becomes the gold standard of Hitler and all that was going on in in German atrocities during World War II, when that becomes the quote of this hearing.
I'm going to leave you, and I'll...
Absolutely incredible. So when I said that this is moved towards fascism, and when I said that there's a growing authoritarianism in the US politics and in Washington, when you have a lawmaker quoting Goebbels in Congress, positively, you put two and two together and it does appear to make four. Now, US sanctions so it increases sanctions on Russian firms. This is interesting because the US hasn't made moves towards this, but it does also lift sanctions on Putin's ally's wife. So something weird is going on there. The US has expanded its sanctions on Russian companies while simultaneously removing restrictions on the wife of Boris Rottenberg, a close associate of Putin. Interesting that they are at least increasing sanctions to some degree there. Now, I talked to you the other day, this isn't particularly pertinent to anything, but it's just the end of a conversation when I was talking about radical reform and radical populism, and these populist leaders like Le Pen, when they are frustrated from coming into power, it gives them greater popularity. And sometimes we want them to get into power so that they show us how bad they are at actually governing, because they are people with simplistic ideas that are unable to cope with the complexity of the problems they're seeking to solve. So populists, I don't think, are ready to govern often and are able to either. And sometimes this is reflected by their policy advocacy, because actually they don't need to present a really sensible manifesto, because they're the anti-establishment groups that hang around on the outside and never actually going to get enough votes to get fully into power, like to form a majority government. So actually they can say what they like on the side, say really appealing stuff. Everyone goes, oh yeah, that'll be amazing. But actually they never quite get enough votes. They're never going to get enough votes to get elected in. But actually Reform are looking like they could do some serious damage in the next election. So it's worth just concentrating on this, because Nigel Farage from Reforms announced the other day, your council is broken, Reform will fix it. It's worth reminding the electorate in the UK that Reform have never, of course, run a council. Neither did its forerunner, the Brexit Party. UKIP did. So you went UKIP, Brexit Party, Reform. That's the evolution of these parties. But UKIP did actually get control of a council. And it's worth remembering that when they did get control of that council, so remember, when these radical reformists get into power, are they good at governing? It went bankrupt in 7 months and was investigated for fraud and corruption. That's what you get. And I just want to highlight a couple of things about Nigel Farage. So people like him. He says, oh yeah, I like Nigel Farage. He says it how it is. When you look at his record, he's a freaking terrible politician. And by that, I mean he's absolutely lazy and doesn't do his job. So, 11 votes in Parliament this week. Farage has not been there to vote on a single one of them. He keeps going to America to do fundraising for Trump, but he's not in Clacton sorting out his constituency. Farage has not been a single vote of the 11 votes in Parliament this week So the look at Meteor being more important, he has voted 57 times in Parliament out of 167 votes. In other words, he's got a voting record of about 34%. He votes for a third of the things in Parliament. Now, we know this of him. If you remember, and as soon as I saw that, I knew, well, straight away, I've got to find the stats for when he was a member of a European Parliament for the UKIP party, because he was the worst MEP. He was on the fisheries group, and he's supposed to be advocating for fisheries, for the UK fisheries. One of the things about Brexit was like, our fishermen, Europe, blah, 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 all these rules, and we get screwed over by European fishermen. And so Nigel Farage was on the EU Fisheries Board Commission or whatever, but he never turned up to meetings. He used to whinge about stuff, but he'd never go and sort it out. He was a paid up MEP to go and sort and advocate for our fishermen in Europe, and he didn't go to the meetings. And when you could look back, this is a 2016 article, when he was an MEP, UKIP leader Nigel Farage has the worst voting record of any active MEP in the European Parliament. His voting record places him 745 out of 746, actually, so he's one above 746. Only Brian Crowley, an MEP in Ireland, who has never voted, below him. So there might be some reason he had never voted. So essentially, he's the worst MEP that was in Parliament. Now, again, it goes back to this idea that these people can shout about stuff and whinge about things, but what's the actual track record for getting stuff done is non-existent. So just be warned about populists. And Reform, I think, are a really good example of that will shout from the sides, and that look, you might be attracted by their simplistic rhetoric, giving like really easy answers to complex solutions. But these guys are they're not ready to govern, I don't think, and they don't have the background, they don't have the form, they're not serious enough. People can slag off career politicians, but they've made it their life's work to go and vote and do things. These sort of upstart crows come along, and I don't know. Right, two last things. This is on peace deals. We've had Keith Kellogg, the envoy to Ukraine, saying, in here interview on Fox News with Maria Bartiromo.
Do you think China is working supportively with Russia behind the scenes?
They're not supporting Maria behind the scenes. They're supporting him up front, and we know that with this long-term peace process they've got going together. But that doesn't mean we can't get involved with China. We can actually put, to me, a little bit of a wedge between them, and I think we can do that. The Biden administration ignored that. President Trump is not going to ignore it. He understands the importance what China brings to the world, and understands the relationship between China and the United States, and we're going to address it.
Do you think?
And he thinks that they are close to a deal. This is just a little thing. Like, notice how quickly she says yes. She didn't really. She's not cogitating on what he's saying about the Biden administration not driving a wedge between Russia and China. The quickness that she says yes, she knows that he's just criticised Biden, and there's an automatic. You criticise Biden? Yes. Whatever he did, it was wrong. It was wrong. It's just this happens.
And I think we can do that. The Biden administration ignored that. President Trump is not going to ignore.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Definitely. Oh, bastards! What did they ignore? What did they do? Do you know? Do you think about that? No. I just know that there was a criticism in there. Okay. We have the Coalition of the Willing that will be meeting this week, or representatives of those countries that are going to be supporting Ukraine with troops on the ground. The Coalition of the Willing on Ukraine agreed that at least one European leader should talk to Russia, said Finnish President Stubb. Quote, France or the UK should be the ones to talk to Putin. So it's interesting that he's advocating for either Macron or Starmer to be the leaders who are representing Europe with regard to the US. And that's something I've said before. I think that has to come from one of the big European countries, not just kind of geopolitical heft, but you could argue that geopolitical heft is based on population. So I think literally the big countries in Europe, the ones with the biggest populations, probably need to have their leaders representing Europe, because they'll be seen to be more representative, but more kind of powerful. I also think English speakers are important, and really you're only going to have, I mean, with Friedrich Merz not yet in, I think you can only really have Macron or Starmer. And actually, I think both of those leaders are doing a pretty good job advocating for Ukraine. So I think either of those are good choices. And Stubb seems to think that as well. Anyway, that's enough from me. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I know I waffle on a lot of different topics, but I think they're all important, and they do kind of dovetail, eventually, even when I'm talking about parochial British populist parties like Reform and their leaders, you can take what I'm saying and apply that to your own country's leaders that are coming from similar parties and say, yeah, actually, I think I recognise that characteristic. Yeah, and I don't think that these guys are actually all that serious in governing. They're more like just want to break things. And I think there are general points that we can learn from using individual examples that might be sometimes UK centric from my point of view, because I'm British, right? So I'm going to know more about certain things taking place in Britain and certain characters in Britain, but hopefully they will generate discussion, and there might be some kind of broader universalities from them. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care. Speak to you soon.